Hello, everyone. Thank you. So if you were at the RIPE meeting near Rome recently, then you've seen this one, and I apologize. I thought it was important to bring it to this community. Probably I should have done that earlier, but the timings of the RIPE meetings and the work that had been going on in that community and the timings of the OARC meetings didn't line up very well, so here it is. So a bit of background on what this effort is that we had a number of people in the EU government were getting increasingly nervous about important critical network services coming from non-European organizations, mostly US, but also Chinese-based, right? So in the context of DNS, this means people were using Google and Cloudflare and things like that, and they thought, well, how are we going to solve this? So they did it in the European Commission style, and they created a request for proposals, and they said, we're going to set up a company, and we're going to pay for half of it, and it's going to follow this list of 100 and things to do in the EU, and so on. And the RIPE community found out about this, and as you would expect, we're grumpy because we hate governments and things like that, although we realize that the goal of having resolvers that aren't in control of big tech by foreign powers maybe makes a lot of sense. So it's like, what are we going to do about this? Well, so what we did, what makes sense, and actually Joao over here was the main instigator of all this effort, and we said, well, we're actually going to make a set of recommendations as a kind of first step to encouraging more people to run their own resolvers, whether that's just running their own resolvers for their organization, their company or whatever, or whether it's actually setting up a public resolver. But the goal is not to say we want a big centralized resolver, this one in Europe, so this one's good. So I'll go back here. We put together a document. That's the way we do things in RIPE in this context. It's not quite like the IETF, but producing documents is one of the things we do. And so we're going to produce a recommendations document. And we actually came up with a draft right before the previous RIPE meeting near Rome. That was at the end of I think it was November, December last year, something like that. And so I'm going to go over a little bit of what's in there and just very quickly, because this is a lightning talk about the kind of things that we recommended. So there's two kinds of recommendations that are in this document. The first ones are kind of very specific and detailed, like the one you see on the screen here. So in this case, it's about avoiding fragmentation, which we just had a talk on about, right? So in this case, we try not to replicate existing work and recommendations, but we refer to them. So in this case, we refer to an IETF draft, which talks about the best things to do to avoid fragmentation in DNS. And this is the kind of recommendation we make in these more specific technical ones. The second kind of recommendation we have in this draft is, how do I say this? Less specific and technical. It's more about approaches you want to take. So in this case, it's about transparency, right? So best practice in this area would be to provide a report which will document, for example, any request from law enforcement or from judges that you received. And RIPE NCC does this, for example, every year they put out a report saying, 20 countries sent us a request for information about networks, and we sent them all to the WHOIS database because it's ridiculous. And that's the kind of thing that you should produce a report. So this is the kind of recommendation, the other style of recommendation that's in this document, because not everything can just refer to an RFC or whatever. So I'm going to just very quickly go through the topics. Yeah, I have time. So the document starts out just with a little bit of metadata saying who it's for. All these recommendations, we try to distinguish recommendations which are for anyone running a resolver and anyone who's running a public resolver, because there's a slightly different focus. When you're running a resolver for your company, for example, you have a very direct relationship with the users, and you can have a very different kind of privacy policies and things like that. Whereas a public resolver, you have different requirements, basically. So that's who it's for. What is the document not? It's not really, at this point, a checklist. You can't just go through and say, we do this and this and this, because as I showed you a couple slides ago, even the more specific technical recommendation says, here's an RF, or here's a draft in this case to read and learn about it. That's not something you could put on a checklist and say, we do that, because each of those referred to documents is in itself quite detailed and so on. We also didn't consider it something that can be used by a certifying body or even an academic. That's probably going to be disappointing to a lot of people, because I think there's interest in the academic community in saying, we want to look at all of the public resolvers and see which ones are good or whatever. And that's not really the intention here. So anyway, as far as specific topics, we have things about how to harden your systems. These are both networks and the machines themselves. We have a lot of things about what we think you should do with the network. Sorry, Jeff, we say that you should have to have IPv6. We talk about anycasting and the cases where it's useful and where it's not, filtering, denial of service protection, routing protection, that's the RPKA stuff. All the things you see on the slide here, we have recommendations about everything. On the DNS knobs, we have a whole bunch of stuff. You can see the things. I'm not going to read through all of these. But we have recommendation for all of these things. So for example, we say, please use local root. It will reduce your traffic and make your system more stable, and there's really no downside, and things like that. And so, and these are all, it's not written in this language of the IETF. We don't say you must do this or you should do that, but we say you should do that. Anyway, the final set of things is more of these topics are more of these kind of higher level ones. Privacy considerations. So for example, you should have a privacy policy and you should publish it places where all the users can read it, things like that. We talk about blocking requirements, and within the RIPE region, most places unfortunately have a legal requirement for resolver operators to block certain DNS traffic. And while I personally think that's not great, we don't want anyone to get arrested by following our recommendation. So basically, recommendation is sort of like follow the law. So anyway, we did ask for some feedback. I was quite late in producing my report. We have got, yes, thank you. We have gotten feedback, and I'm not going to go through all of it. We have a meeting scheduled for next week where we're going to review all the final feedback and then produce a final document. Yeah, and just people here may not be familiar with how this works. This is a RIPE task force, and it doesn't follow the RIPE policy development process. It doesn't sit within any of the RIPE working groups, which have mostly a consensus-based model. It's basically a group of people who are kind of assigned this as a work item. And so our intention is we're going to produce this document with all these recommendations on how we think it's good to run a resolver. It's going to be a RIPE document. It's going to get a unique number and that kind of stuff, so you can refer to it. But it's not from the RIPE community at large. There will then be a discussion within the community about what to do about this. My expectation is that this is sort of step 0 of a process that's going to continue. We expect that once this document exists, we have to decide what to do next, and that will be the process of going and trying to encourage people to run resolvers, maybe updating resolvers that are currently being run to match this. I talked to someone from Quad 9 at FOSDEM over the last weekend, and I'm committing publicly here, I shouldn't do this, but we're gonna go through the recommendations that we have and compare it to Quad 9 systems and just see where the mismatches are, and where they match up, we're gonna put a green check mark, and where they don't match up, we're gonna dig in and figure out why don't they do what we recommended. There's probably a good reason. Maybe our recommendation doesn't make sense, maybe it doesn't make sense in general, and so we're hoping to learn from that process. And that's my expectation about what the next step is for this. So it's weird that, thank you, it's weird that I'm the person that got assigned and worked on this, because I don't work for a company that runs resolvers, and I've never worked for a company that runs resolvers, really. So it's quite possible that a lot of this is crap. However, there are members on the task force who are experts in that area and do work for big resolvers, so hopefully it's not completely nonsense. And that's it. You can download the slides and follow the links. Thank you.